Asyle, the engineer, and the island. Week 42, Day 1. It cleared up a bit today, which was nice, but it threw me off my planned schedule of mining today. Still, I need to take the sunny days when I can get them, and it occurred to me that I should probably set aside a day each week to make paper as well, since that's something I keep running out of. So once I was done foraging for food and bamboo, I started alternating between loading sand into the kiln for lime and grinding down all my bamboo scraps into paper. Figured I might as well make some cloth too while I was at it. Again, it's good to have a stockpile ready for when a project comes up by surprise, and I feel like I've kind of forgotten that lately. I basically spent the whole day working on this, splitting the cellulose half and half between paper and cloth before setting the loom to run overnight and heading to bed. Week 42, Day 2. There was hardly a cloud in the sky today, which was actually kind of annoying, because I want to take advantage of the good weather, but I need to start mining again soon. I checked my weather instruments and did some extrapolations based on past data. Looks like the air pressure has reached a local minimum and is beginning to drop again, but slowly, which means tomorrow might be clear as well. I wouldn't trust my extrapolations out more than a day, but I think this means I can get away with spending one beautiful sunny day down in a dark cave blowing things up. At least it's cooler down there. It seems like such a small, innocuous thing, but the ability to predict the weather even a day in advance is hugely useful. With that, I got the explosives machine started and began drilling my pilot holes, as there were still several ore veins in the shaft, some of which were still left over from blasting last week, and went deeper into the rock than I could see, which is great news for me because it means there's a lot more metal on the island and easily accessible than I thought there was. I spent the day blasting, with few mishaps fortunately. I found a way to mitigate misfires by basically adding a spare fuse and blasting cap to each ANFO package, to make absolutely sure they go off. 9 times out of 10, those things are the cause of misfires. At the end of the day, I gathered up my ore and left it in the grinder to separate overnight. I should be able to smelt it tomorrow. Week 42, Day 3. There were a few more clouds in the sky today, but not enough to stop the solar kiln from operating. Once I was done with my morning chores, including stockpiling bamboo, I started smelting copper, basically repeating what I did a few days ago, making cable, light bulbs, and covers. I stopped at lunchtime and checked on the weather instruments, which suggested it was going to gradually start getting rainy again tomorrow. I finished assembling the light fixtures after lunch, and while I was in the workshop, I remembered to remove the iron plates for the turbine motor, replace the ore, and spend an hour or so chiseling out the correct shapes, though I'd figured out a way to make it easier on myself by partially covering the flat anode plates where I didn't need any metal building up. At that point, I had all the plates I needed to assemble the motor. I was just short on copper for the windings. One more mining day should net me enough, and I should finally be able to start testing this crazy plan. I had a couple of hours to kill at the end of the day, so, starting to get jazzed about the turbine project, I began splitting, hollowing, and sealing some of my bamboo for pipes, which I'll need to initially bring water to the turbine in the first place, and then to supply the necessary piping as the device drills down into the earth. I'll probably have to build some kind of reservoir at the drilling site as well, in order to hold on to and recycle the water being used for drilling, but that's something I can do later. Fortunately, I've got enough lime stockpiled now for that. Week 42, Day 4. As I predicted, it rained today. Harder than a drizzle, that's for sure, but fortunately not exactly torrential. Still, it would have made foraging a pain, so I retreated underground today, as there was plenty to do. I decided to spend the first half of my day finishing the helical ramp under the chapel, cutting bamboo and branches to span the rails of the ramp in a radial direction from the center. The bamboo in particular I cut into halves and left the flat parts pointing up, so they would better catch my feet or a wheelbarrow wheel if I slipped. I then spent some time rebalancing and reinforcing the pulley system, making sure the ramp rose and lowered smoothly like I wanted it to, and making sure that every point on the ramp could handle a concentrated load. The whole thing feels a bit delicate, but at the same time, I'm really pleased with the elegant mechanics of it. To make it feel a bit more stable, and to protect the support cables, I built some poles around the perimeter of the ramp reaching from the floor to the ceiling of the tunnel as rails, giving them a little triangulation to keep the whole framework rigid and to prevent the ramp from wobbling when I walk on it. When I decided it was pretty much ready, I carefully started moving the explosives machine down into the tunnels, finally, along with a few batches of lime before stopping for lunch. I then mixed up a big batch of varnish, cleaned my muddy footprints off the ramp, and started varnishing it, particularly the floor, where it would get the most wear. Near the end of the day, I took my lime and some clay down to the shaft and started building that water reservoir for the vortex drilling site, stacking up a bunch of rocks into a loose well shape, about 3 feet in diameter, and mortaring it all together before giving it a nice, even coating all around. It occurred to me, though, that I would have to come back later and give it a glazed coating on the inside, just like my electrolysis tub, because it was probably going to end up being filled with sulfuric acid eventually, and I didn't want that eating away at the concrete. A problem for tomorrow, I guess. Week 42, Day 5. The rain's gone, but it was still a bit overcast today, so after my morning chores, I decided I had enough chemicals to do one more bonus day of blasting, especially since the weather forecast seemed to suggest that tomorrow will be sunny, and a perfect opportunity to get some smelting done. So that's what I spent my day doing, still aiming for what copper deposits I could identify, in particular that one vein that seems to just keep going deeper and deeper into the wall. I stopped for lunch in the middle of the day, and at the end of the day I loaded my ore into the grinder for separation. I had a little time to kill and remembered that the geothermal well wasn't finished, so I gathered up some firewood and coated the interior surface of the well with a mix of salt water and clay before lighting a little bonfire in it. This actually lit up the shaft in a way that I hadn't seen it before, and it was frankly pretty eerie. I kinda liked it though, almost like I was performing some strange ritual to try and awaken the volcano again, which I suppose, in a way, I am. I then left the bonfire to burn down overnight. Week 42, Day 6. As predicted, it was a nice sunny day today, and I was looking forward to actually getting a little bit ahead on my projects, as I wasn't expecting to have extra ore. So after my morning chores, once the solar kiln had warmed up, I spent the morning melting copper ore and turning it into wire, along with making more light bulbs and more lamp covers before having lunch. I figured this would be enough for me to extend my power supply all the way to the shaft, so after lunch, I finished assembling the lamps and headed back underground, running my long string of lights from the opening under the chapel, past the rotating passageway, and up to the entrance of the shaft. At one point, though, I became aware of a bit of a problem, Namely that my wind turbine, which was already weak and sporadic, didn't generate enough DC voltage to make it down such a long length of wire. Most of the juice got wasted running the lights, but even without them, there wasn't much left at the ends of the wires to drive the turbine motor, just because of the resistance losses in the wire. It's an irritating setback, though for some reason not a disheartening one, probably because I know what I need to do. I need to bump up the sophistication of my power grid a bit and switch from DC to AC, along with building some transformers to step up the voltage for transmission and step it down once it gets to the turbine at the end of the line. That means I'm going to need more copper than I thought, and probably more iron too. But fortunately, there's also plenty more iron and other ores that I've separated from what I've been blasting out over the past few weeks. Actually, I was kind of expecting that I might need to do this, as I knew it was a long way for the electricity to travel. It looks like I'll need at least 3 more loads of copper ore for the motor and transformer coils, and maybe 4 more rounds of electrolysis to make the transformer cores. Probably 1 more month of setbacks. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But that's just the story of my life, so at this point I hardly batted an eyelid at it. Just need to get the next thing done. I had a couple of hours to kill at the end of the day, and I decided to spend them making some plans for this new power grid. I figured that making the alternating current won't be difficult. All I need to do is remove the commutator from the generator and offset the coils a little so they all output a voltage differential in time with each other. A bigger problem I'm going to have, however, is that some of the machines I've built, like the batteries and electrolytic cells, have to use DC, and I don't think the Van de Graaff generators will supply enough juice to make them work efficiently. I'm going to have to make some other kind of commutator that turns AC into DC, but I don't want to use a mechanical system like they used back in the 1900s if I can avoid it, because that's going to be more iron and copper that I'd have to process. I spent some time instead designing a circuit using my electrolytic transistors, which will basically measure the polarity of an incoming voltage and redirect it so it always passes through the output the same direction, turning AC into DC and taking advantage of the fact that these transistors are bipolar. The addition of a capacitor should also smooth out the pulsing for more even DC, which will probably be better for electrolysis and charging batteries than the pulsing DC I've been using so far. Finally, I'll need to add some big resistors to the lamps, otherwise the high AC voltage will burn them out. With all that figured out and added to my to-do list, I decided to relax till the end of the day. Week 42, Day 7. Naturally, it was my day off again, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. There wasn't a lot I could think of that needed doing in the sun anyway. I conducted my morning chores as usual, going a bit longer than usual to collect and stockpile bamboo, and then I listened to the sermon on the radio and transcribed my Bible recordings. After that, I went to the dome, tended the garden a little, and had lunch while I was down there. I decided today that I wanted to explore the reef a little, so I used some of my superoxide to explore for an hour or two, looking at all the fish and marine organisms. I forget how relaxing it is down there. When I got back, I spent a little time writing about what few new specimens I found, and then remembered that I never finished the tune I started making for the music machine last week. I finished that, but then realized that I could probably avoid this rigmarole of building a new reel and making adjustments every time I wanted to hear a song, in favor of just recording them on my gramophone. So I spent some time making a big batch of record plates and left them to dry overnight. If there's still sun tomorrow, I can bake them in the kiln. I spent the last couple of hours in the evening writing, initially adding to my naturalist records, and then I started writing something just for my own entertainment, mostly short outlines of random stories I've made in the past, or thought of while working to keep my mind occupied. I often forget how therapeutic it is to just get your thoughts on paper where you can work with them, and I've often used writing stories as an escape. So I think this can also help me escape the doldrums of my situation, when sad, hopeless thoughts might get a word in edgewise. I've been working on the bloopers. Okay, back in the saddle, back in the closet. Now that I've managed to steal back my tongue from the anxiety demons known as canker sores, I can get back to recording. I found a way to mitigate. Minigate. It's a minigate for mini people. 9 times out of 10, those things are the cause of mythfires. A mythfire is what you call a successful test. For the Mythbusters, at least. Da 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 da. Week 42, Day 4. Making sure the ramp rose and lowered. Making sure the ramp rose. It's hard to say for some reason. Near the end of the day, I took my lime and some clay down to the shaft and started building that water reservoir for the vortex drilling site, stacking up a bunch of rocks into a loose well shape about 3 feet in diameter and mortaring it all together. There should be a comma there. That is not a complete sentence by itself. Word, I expect you to catch these kinds of mistakes. I figured this would be enough for me to extend my power supply past the rotating passageway. Yes, that's correct. Which will probably be better for electrolysis, okay? With all of that figured out and added to my there wasn't a lot I could think of. That needed doing in this. Funny sounds. Hey there. Thanks for listening all the way to the end, even if this was another short one. At least I made some important progress laying the groundwork for the geothermal borehole project, and next week I'll start working on the AC power grid. So, if you want to see how that turns out, or if I finally manage to electrocute myself, you can press the subscribe and bell buttons to get notified as soon as the next episode is ready. Now, although I have no intention of ever monetizing these videos, it would still help me out more than anything else if you could share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. And since you apparently enjoyed it enough to watch it to the end, you can press the like button to say so, and to tell the algorithm to do a little bit of that sharing for you. Also, if you'd like to chat about your own stories and perspectives on the episode, perhaps some of your ongoing 2 steps forward, 1 step back projects, feel free to share them in the comments section below. I genuinely love to hear them, and I'm always open to suggestions and corrections. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.